FfB Global Finance for Biodiversity Foundation internal webinar. First of all, I would like to introduce to you my new colleague, Julien Gonzalez Redin, who recently joined the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation as a technical director. So maybe a very brief word for you, by you, Julien.
Yep.
As this is your first meeting the members.
Yes. Well, thank you, Anne-Marie. Yeah, I'll actually stop sharing. Yeah, so nice meeting you all. And as Anne-Marie said, I'm the technical director of Finance for Biodiversity Foundation. Maybe very quickly, a bit of my background. I come from the environmental science sector, where I did my PhD in sustainability and natural capital. And over the past years, I've been helping businesses and corporations in measuring their impacts and dependencies on biodiversity, setting targets on biodiversity, and overall helping them navigate this biodiversity pathway. So yeah, nice meeting you and looking forward to collaborate. And I'll share my screen again.
Thanks a lot. And I'd like to hand over to Lidmila, the co-chair of the Impact Assessment Working Group, who will be moderating this internal Finance for Biodiversity Foundation members webinar. Over to you, Lidmila.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. So my name is Ludmila Strakadonskaya. I'm an ESG analyst and lead on biodiversity within AXA IM, a French asset manager, and I'm also part of a member of the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation and the co-chair of the Impact Assessment Working Group, as Anne-Marie just mentioned. So we're happy to present to you today Meet the Tool Developer webinar series. This is one of the series of webinars that we organized this year. And if last year the webinar series was focused on impact solutions, today we are deep diving into dependencies assessment. And as you see on your screen, we already had some presentations. On the 20th of June, it was the presentation by Iceberg Data Lab on their solution regarding dependencies and impact. And on the 11th of July, we also had a presentation by CDC Biodiversity and Carbon 4 Finance, also presenting their solution on dependencies. The upcoming webinars would be well, you have this one already on the 7th of September, so this is today. We will be having a presentation on impacts and dependencies, but with the focus on dependencies from S&P Global. And the next webinar will be on the 16th of November on Thursday, and this will be the presentation by presentation of the Encore tool by UNEP WCMC. So this is a quick update, and what I may say about today's session is that we will be talking about the tool which is called Nature and Biodiversity Risk Solution, developed by S&P Global, and we will have a deep dive presentation on the tool, and especially with a focus on dependencies from Bob and Gauthier, both representatives of S&P Global. And I will probably give the floor to them, but one just point on the practicalities. The session is being recorded already right now, and then it will be shared with the Finance for Biodiversity members only, so all of you will have access to the video. And we will have a Q&A session after the presentation by Bob and Gauthier. So I stop here, and Bob, Gauthier, please go ahead.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ludmila, Anne-Marie, and Julien, and thank you all for giving us the opportunity to come and present. So just to kind of quickly introduce ourselves, we've got Gauthier Desmain, who's the head of data innovation here at Sustainable One, based in Australia, and then I am based in Boston, and I'm a managing director for our Nature and Climate Risk Solutions here within the Sustainable One business of S&P Global. Next slide, please. So just to provide a little bit of context, so in terms of an agenda, so we'll provide a little bit of an overview into kind of why S&P Global began developing this application to begin with. Jump into what the coverage and solution is on the product, and then we'll deep dive into some of the dependencies. At the end, we'll come back to some key takeaways for what we've seen from the data and ways that can be applied within key regulatory workflows. So that's kind of how we'll progress throughout the presentation. If there's time, we'll also try to give a demo at the end along with some of the Q&A. So let me just jump into it right here. So from a market problem perspective, I think everyone's become aware that the speed and scale of biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation are the highest in history. And global leaders have identified that biodiversity loss is the fourth most severe global risk. There's been heightened awareness of this, of the issue for nature and biodiversity risk, especially in relation to climate risk. And so what we've really tried to focus on is how can we provide decision makers with key data and analytics to actually help them address this risk. And so if you go on to the next slide, please. So the S&P Global Nature and Biodiversity Risk Solution provides clients with decision-grade metrics for a company's impact and dependencies on nature to support three key workflows. The first would be regulatory reporting in order to align with TNFD and other regulatory frameworks. The second one is portfolio analysis in order to help our financial clients do portfolio optimization. And then the second one will be corporate benchmarking and risk analysis. So the ability to identify key impacts and dependencies on nature at the corporate level and how that may compare against peers and competitors within that sector. We cover over 130 metrics for both impact and dependency at a global level for over 17,000 public and private companies, utilizing a bottoms-up methodology that leverages our market-leading asset data coverage for over 1.6 million assets for key heavy industry sectors, so energy, mining, to name a few. All within a geospatial context. So we've created interactive analysis based on that bottoms-up asset data. You can see that in relation to heat protected areas and biodiversity areas to understand exactly what the overlap is, and GoTable will go into that much deeper. But as you can see, it's a very rich and deep data set, again, leveraging some of the strengths of S&P Global's deep corporate and asset level data. Next slide, please. In order to build this, we've partnered also with the UN Environmental Program and World Conservation Monitoring Center, leveraging the best of both firms in order to really make sure that we're able to provide a market-leading and differentiated solution. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but by bringing to bear some of our market-leading asset coverage, along with additional technical solutions, in line with their existing insights on nature's contribution, society, and the economy. So a lot of the work that they've done to develop mean species abundance, along with Encore tools, it looks like they're going to come back later and present along with a lot of their other market-leading data sets. So by bringing the two of these together, we've created a differentiated data set in order to help people evaluate their nature and biodiversity risk. Now, in order to, actually, before I kind of hand over to Gauthier, I think I want to provide a few coverage statistics. So if we go next slide, please. For those, I mentioned that over 17,000 over 17,000 companies and then 1.6 million assets. What that allows us to do here is cover kind of key. So from a finance perspective, it allows us to cover key indices, which you can see here laid out on the chart below. We do split up the analysis into two different methodologies, one at an asset level, that full bottoms-up analysis, and one at the company level for where we don't have full asset level coverage. And you can see that split as well. But for most of the major global indices, we cover approximately 90% of the index structure, so or the index composition. You can see that layout here. So I'll pause here and pass over to Gauthier to kind of dive into our methodology.
Thank you, Bob. Next slide, please. So maybe before we dive deeper into the methodology, especially for dependencies, a few key building analytical principles for the product. So as Bob mentioned, we leverage our extensive asset and company level database. So in order to locate company operations. So when we have asset level information, we can use that. And when we do not have asset level information, because obviously we don't have a full coverage yet, we can use our data on companies' breakdowns of revenue and their geographical location to use sector and geographical proxies so that we can still estimate a large universe of companies. Once we've located the company operations, we need to put them into context. So we locate essentially the ecosystems, the type of ecosystems and the state of these ecosystems, as well as whether they are biodiversity or hotspots or protected areas. So, this is very much following the recommendations of the LEAP process from the TNFD. By putting those two together and applying some of the concepts and models that were introduced or developed by UNEP WCMC, we can then evaluate the impact and dependencies of these businesses locally, and this is obviously very much location specific. And what we've done is to try and distillate all these impacts and scientific analytics into clear and understandable and decision useful metrics that provides our clients and users with a set of key metrics and where they can understand and quantify essentially the various impacts and dependencies and understand where these impacts and dependencies are coming from. Next slide. So these are the building blocks that we've actually submitted to the market for feedback just a year ago. We built a knowledge community around this product development to make sure that we were gathering as much feedback as possible. And so we submitted these building blocks last year in a white paper. And so this is essentially the summary of how we would like to how we wanted to tackle nature risk. So when we started the project, there were a few key design features that we wanted to follow. The first one is we wanted to be future-proof, and obviously we realized that in the current environment, there's a lot of innovation in the space, in the nature and biodiversity space, which is a great thing. A lot of innovation in terms of data, in terms of models. And so we didn't want to develop a methodology that was simply based on what exists today, because we knew that in 12 or 18 months, it would quickly become outdated. So we put that aside and we started to look at how we would like to define nature risk should we have no data issues and data gap issues. So this is the result of these building blocks. This is how we want to and how we would define nature risk, both on the impact and dependency side, and I'll dive into that a bit later. The second design principle was the idea of the building blocks, so that we actually have a modular structure, so that we can combine some of these blocks to take more of a bird's eye view, and also decompose and these blocks into smaller and smaller issues, so that we understand where the overall results are coming from and what's driving the results. The third design feature is that obviously, again, because we know there's going to be progress made on the science and the data, we wanted this methodology to be data agnostic, so that we can feed it at any point in time the best available data going forward. Final design feature, and that's quite a key one, especially compared to existing methodologies, and it's really to try and tackle that double arrow between impact and dependencies. We all agree that impacts and dependencies are two sides of the same coin, but existing methodologies did not really tackle that so well. So when looking at impacts, the definition of nature tended to be a very micro one, right? Nature was defined as biodiversity, and most of the existing methodologies out there are looking at impacts on biodiversity itself. All nice and well, but then when we're looking at dependencies, it makes more sense to look at a more macro definition of nature, which is the ecosystem and ecosystem services. And there's methodologies out there that tackle that. So the problem is that when you define nature in two different ways, then it's very hard to represent the interactions between impact and dependencies in any location and the systemic nature of nature risk. So that's why we decided to use a single definition of nature in this approach, which is the definition we use the concept. And this is really much why we talk about nature and not just biodiversity. And so we're looking at ecosystems and integrity of ecosystems impacts on ecosystem and dependencies to the ecosystem services. So that concept of ecosystems as a nature definition is really key. Next slide, please. Great. So this is a focus on impacts, and we'll dive deeper into dependencies after that. But also I'll quickly introduce the approach. So we define impact on nature through two things. The first one is the magnitude of the potential impact, which is defined by the area being impacted in absolute terms. So think about hectares of land. And the second component is the intensity with which the ecosystem is being impacted. So by how much the integrity of the ecosystem is being reduced. And the combination of both provides us with what we call an ecosystem integrity footprint, which is very similar to your biodiversity footprint in the MSA context, right? You've got hectares equivalent MSA that quantify the impact on biodiversity in hectares equivalent. Except in this case, we're looking at hectares equivalent of pristine ecosystems. All good, but we wanted to move the needle a little bit, and we realized that existing methodologies all treated any ecosystem equally. So it didn't really matter whether you were degrading a tropical ecosystem or like a rainforest. Compared to a desert, your hectares MSA impact would be exactly the same in both locations if you're building the same project, which we think is a big weakness of existing methodologies. So that's why we introduced the concept of significance, right? Because some ecosystems are more significant than others. And so that's why we introduced that second pillar, which is key, is how significant is the actual area that's being impacted. And the way we define significance is through basically two lenses. The first lens is a species lens. So we're looking at how significant an area is for biodiversity conservation. And so here we leverage data sets from IBAT and the STAR metric. So this is very much a species view. And the second lens is a human-centric view, whereby we look at the significance of an ecosystem for the provision of what we call nature contribution to people, or in other terms, ecosystem services. So here, this is, really to quantify how important an area is for human beings. And the overall significance index is basically the maximum of the two. So it doesn't really matter whether it's significance for species or humans, we take the maximum of the two. And so what we can do with that index is that we can then weigh any area in the world by its significance, right? And then by weighing that area by its significance and then calculating the impact on its integrity, what we can do is get as close as it gets today to a ton of CO2 equivalent, but in the context of nature, right? So we can express any impact globally in hectares equivalent of the most pristine and significant ecosystems in the world. And that allows us to actually differentiate different ecosystems in different states and answers questions that existing methodologies could not answer, which is where can I develop a project that's going to be impactful, and where should I not develop a project that's going to be impactful because the significance is already embedded in it. Next slide, please. Great. So on the dependencies front, so still looking at ecosystems and ecosystem services, and on the risk that companies face should these ecosystem services disappear. So here we define risk in a very common way, and that's also in line with the definition that's in the TNFD, which is basically two components. There's exposure to risk and the likelihood of the risk taking place. So this is very similar to what is done in the credit space. The credit risk is the probability of default and your loss given default. So this is very much a very similar approach, but translated in the context of ecosystem services. So the first component, which is reliance, is your exposure to ecosystem services. how reliant is a business to an ecosystem service, and therefore exposed to its disappearance. So here we leverage the Anchor framework, which I think UNEP will come to present on the next webinar, whereby we map processes of the to our database of assets and companies and the sectors they operate in to derive a score. I'll explain that into more details. And that makes up a materiality score. Having said that, that materiality score needs to be tilted, so I'll dive into that a bit deeper. But overall, that reliance pillar is assessing the exposure. And then we combine this with a resilience component, so resilience score, which quantifies the likelihood of the ecosystem service disappearing. So think about, the disappearance of the supply of natural resource like water, or the loss of capacity of an ecosystem to maintain, regulating and manage ecosystem services. Next slide. So this is the more explanation on the materiality score. So I've mentioned that we leverage the Anchor framework. So we basically score the materiality of 21 ecosystem services, 2 production processes, with a score that basically ranges from 0 to 1, which is a numerical translation of no dependency to very high dependency. And we do that for the 21 ecosystem services. So you have an example on the right side for oil and gas, with medium to high dependencies to several ecosystem services. What we do though is that instead of mapping that to a coarse geeks classification, we actually at Truecost and S&P have a breakdown of a company's revenues across sector classification of 464 sectors. So it's very granular. And so we've mapped those processes and dependencies of these processes to ecosystems to these 464 sectors that we use to break down a company's business, essentially. Where possible, we also incorporate company level data that we also have. That's the case for surface and groundwater provision. We collect water abstraction and consumption data from companies, and so we also model that within Sustainable One. So we use this data to actually calculate that water and dependency or materiality score, which then is not sector specific anymore, but becomes company specific. So should a company decrease its water consumption and disclose that, we track that, we use that, and it's incorporated into the risk assessment. So all this to say that the methodology and the risk assessment framework is designed to, when available, incorporate company specific data when it's available and disclosed. And assuming that one day with the TNFD we get disclosures on more than one ecosystem service, we'll be able to incorporate that because the methodology is built for that. So that's the first component of the reliance score. Next slide, please. So the materiality as it is built in the Anchor framework is very much activity or sector based, right? Having said that, there's a few ecosystem services which actual benefit really depends on the location of the business. So I'll take an example here. If we look at an infrastructure-based business, it will rely on soil stabilization, for instance, and erosion control. On average, it's going to have a very high dependency on that ecosystem service, or potentially also have a high dependency on flood and storm protection. On average, right? But if I build the same infrastructure in a flood-prone area, that materiality is not the same as if I build the same infrastructure in a flat, dry, and very stable area, right? So there is a lot of variation within a sector, and so we wanted to take that variation into account. So what we do is when we have asset level information, we use relevant geospatial data sets, like landslide susceptibility, for instance, or physical risk, flood and storm exposure scores, to tilt the materiality score with location-specific data, and that tilt basically is incorporated and tilts the materiality score to make the reliance score. So whenever it makes sense, and when we have asset level information, we do basically incorporate that to enhance the overall sector-specific materiality score from ENCORE, and we do that for 3 ecosystem services. Next slide. So second pillar, the resilience. So again, resilience risk is here to quantify the likelihood of an ecosystem service disappearing. It makes sense in most cases to spatially assess that. So we use the same central concept of the methodology, which is the ecosystem integrity index. So I've mentioned the double arrow and at the start to express the interconnection of impact and dependencies, and we do that through the concept of ecosystem integrity and the ecosystem integrity index. I encourage you to consult a public methodology which describes that index. But essentially, this ecosystem integrity concept is central to the methodology, and it's used on the impact side, but it's also used on the dependency side through that concept of resilience. So here we split ecosystem services into 2 kinds. There's the provisioning services, which provide an identified resource. So think about water provision. Here we use data on water scarcity, so that with different level of water scarcity or water stress, we can then quantify the likelihood of water being scarce for any business, right? So that water stress concept is used to define the likely resilience of that service. But for a lot of ecosystem services that are regulating and maintenance services, they are systemic by nature. So it's the whole system that provides that service. There's no natural resource to quantify that we can use, right? So it's the health of the system that we're trying to quantify. And so here, the approach is to use that central concept of ecosystem integrity to quantify the likelihood resilience risk. The assumption being that if an ecosystem is degraded, it's unlikely to keep providing the services that it's been providing, and therefore the risk increases. So your resilience risk is the inverse of your ecosystem integrity, essentially. And when we can, we also complement that with service-specific geospatial layers. Think about soil data, which we incorporate, for instance, where we can. But that concept of ecosystem integrity is central to assess a lot of these regulating and maintenance ecosystem services. We assess this service with different spatial scales. Some services are very localized, so we use the location of the asset. But for those services that are very much landscape based, then we use a much broader assessment of the health of the ecosystem. So all this to say that there's a variety of methods and techniques that are assessed to try and assess each service as closely as possible. And obviously, over time, we might be able to complement the various data sets that come into that assessment. But for the time being, we heavily leveraging the concept of ecosystem integrity. And so, again, to go back to the interconnections between impact and dependencies, what it means is that if a company negatively impacts its ecosystem, think about a mining company that negatively impacts its ecosystem, is going to negatively impact the ecosystem integrity index that we calculate, right? So it's going to be quantified on the impact side, but because it degrades the ecosystem integrity index, then it's going to increase the resilience risk on the dependency side. And so it's going to also increase the dependency risk of that company and potentially other companies in this area, because the ecosystem and its resilience have been degraded. So therefore, now you end up having that relationship between impact and dependencies, which we think were not necessarily well represented in existing methodologies. Next slide, please. So how do we put that all together? So we have a reliance score, which is essentially the geometric mean of our materiality and relevance score. which is essentially a tilt of the materiality. And then the overall dependency score for any of the 21 ecosystem services is, again, the geometric mean of our reliance and resilience scores, so that we have a headline composite score for each ecosystem services. And then we can aggregate the dependency scores of all the 21 ecosystem services to create an aggregate ecosystem service score for any asset, any sector, any activity, and we can then apply that to companies. Next slide. This is the last, final step to create a company score. Then we can essentially, depending on the revenue breakdown and geographical breakdown of the activities of a company, we can then calculate a weighted average of all the various scores of the sectors and countries. And at the asset level, we obviously calculate asset level scores. And so based on the relative value of each asset, we can again calculate a weighted average score at the company level. So we can literally, zoom in at the asset level, zoom out at the company level, and then for investors, compile all that into a portfolio assessment and zoom out again at the portfolio level. So all these metrics are really designed to be able to look at different levels from the asset to the portfolio. Next slide, please. So these are a few of the metrics and sources and resolutions attached to assessments. I'll probably leave that for offline reading, but just a few words on the type of resolution that we use. So for most of the data sets that we leverage, the resolution is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, approximately at the equator. With some data sets that have coarser resolutions, especially when they look at the broader picture. And that's very true of some regulating minutes ecosystem services. We've worked with UNEP WCMC to identify the best available data sets for each risk metric category that can obviously be used in a commercial setting. This was one of the challenges with nature and biodiversity. Not all data sets can be used commercially. We leverage extensively the IBAT data sets, and then we've obviously worked with UNEP WCMC to identify additional data sets that fit into some of the dependency assessments, in particular the resilience scores. We also leverage our in-house physical risk data sets for some of these assessments. And we combine all these into these score metrics that can then be used quite straightforwardly by our clients. But we'll run you into a demo. And with that said, I'll pass it on back to actually, I've got one last slide before passing on to Bob. No, this is time for Bob. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gauthier. That was great. Okay, so sorry, can we go back to the previous slide, please? Excellent. So you've heard a lot on the methodology. Just to bring it back to some of the takeaways, I guess, that we found when we looked at different kind of ways that this impacted the S&P 1200 index. And so and just to kind of see if we could tie it back to some of the statements I made earlier in terms of one, how economies are dependent on nature, and then two, therefore, what the trickle-down effect is on companies. And so there's some high-level statistics I just want to kind of draw out of the data. I think really kind of make that hit home across this data set, across our coverage universe. So the first one, starting in the upper left-hand corner. And the way that I kind of read this is that half of the world's largest companies have at least one asset located in key biodiversity area. So what that means is that there is at least a broad, I guess a broad need for all companies to truly understand what their biodiversity, for nature and biodiversity risks are, and what the distribution of their impacts and dependencies are across nature and biodiversity. Now moving to the right, and again, focus on dependencies. About 85% of the world's largest companies have faced a significant dependency risk on nature across their direct operations. Again, so bringing back to that point is that economies are dependent on nature. So therefore, all large companies will effectively have at least one significant dependency risk within their direct operations. And then down to on the bottom lower left-hand side, the impact risk, and really just to kind of put it into scale. So a lot of our focus really has been on terrestrial impacts. And so the world's largest companies use 22 million hectares of land for direct operations in 2021 to generate approximately 30 trillion in revenue. So by not addressing this risk, another way to look at it, by not addressing this risk, there are direct potential risks on revenue going forward. Let's go to the next slide, because I think one of the things that I like to look into, and where I think this data set actually does have ties into one of the biggest issues related to the energy transition and our ability to actually source battery-related minerals going forward in order to support the energy transition and support the continued build-out and penetration of EVs into global markets. So what we did was we took the overlay of our asset data, so we cover all of the global mining locations, and found that over 1,200 mines are located in sensitive areas throughout the world out of 39,000 mines. And out of those 12,000 mines, 30% of those are located in key biodiversity areas, are actually mining energy transition related minerals. So what that means is any sort of regulatory restrictions that are put in place, any sort of I guess mitigation factors that these companies start to put into place related to manage their risk and their impacts on those areas will also have a direct impact on the overall supply, the overall price levels, and our ability to continue to grow the EV market as projected over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think that's one of the key sectors where this actually really comes to bear, and where it becomes obvious that there is a need to do something, especially if we're going to meet the global ambitions for the energy transition. So those are, I just want to kind of highlight some of the key takeaways from the data set. I think now we'll transition. One of the things I talked about regulatory workflows earlier on. Gauthier, did you want to take over some of the regulatory alignment? I wasn't sure if I was going to continue from here, or if you wanted to pick up and take us away. I'm happy to either way.
That's fine. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, cool.
Of course.
Next slide, please. So in terms of regulatory impacts, we wanted to do is make sure that we could align our data set with these frameworks. And so I'm not going to go through all this, but we'll start here with the Global Biodiversity Framework, and then we'll go on to LEAP, the TNFD LEAP framework in a little bit. I think the key takeaway from this slide is, if you look on the right hand, the lower right hand side of this, is that what we've done is we've in each framework done our best to make sure and align that our data set aligns directly with what's being asked from these reporting frameworks, whether it's voluntary or required. And not all of these are directly related to the nature and biodiversity data set, but we do have complementary data sets that exist throughout other parts of S&P Global on the emissions side. So we're able to kind of bring that content in. And align all of so we're able to meet, I guess, all of the reporting requirements for the Global Biodiversity Framework. And then if you go into the next slide, same thing with the TNFD and LEAP. So I think that at least we're able to address the first parts of LEAP, so the locate, evaluate, and portions of assess. We are currently building out additional metrics in order to fully align with this. So largely on the prepare side, we're continuing to kind of build out the content in order to address that. But we've done our best to make sure that we can align all of the data sets with the TNFD and the framework. So in order to help clients kind of meet these reporting needs in a very easy way. So all right, next slide, please. And then we can kind of maybe pause for questions and go into a demo. So to kind of end here and to conclude, I talked earlier on about the kind of the three main ways that we are or the three main workflows that this data set addresses. So the regulatory reporting, portfolio optimization, and then corporate benchmarking and analysis. The three main areas here highlight how we've done our best to kind of align the data set to support those three workflows and make sure that we are supporting legal and reputational risks. And we showed that example for the mining sites and protected areas and the potential impact on overall supply, demand, and price of energy transition related minerals. The impact risk, being able to actually quantify direct impact that a company is having on nature throughout its direct operations, and then also dependency risks and how we're actually calculating that. So the key dependencies that companies have on nature in order for their businesses to remain stable and sustainable over the foreseeable future. So we can pause there, Gauthier. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but please feel free to jump in here. And why don't I pause there if you want to add anything, and we can go into either Q&A or a very quick demo of the application.
Sure, thanks, Bob. No, I will leave it to everyone to ask questions, or is now a good time for a demo?
Probably we'll see if we have any questions in the audience and then proceed with the demo. Do we have any questions? Please either take the lead and yeah, brilliant. We do have.
Hi there, thank you.
My
name's Stephanie and I sit within Schroders. Thanks very much for the presentation. That was very comprehensive and helpful. This is probably more just a fundamental question about your asset location data. I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit more how you identify that for those more intensive industries. I mean, is it a variety of routes, including, say, public disclosure by companies, but maybe also satellite imagery and so on, just so that I understand where that's being fed from? And I mean, that graphic I think you showed a few slides back around the coverage of companies within different indices was also very helpful.
I'm happy to take this, Gauthier, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So, Stephanie, first of all, thank you very much for your question. I mean, that's been one of the kind of key areas that S&P Global has focused on, and for the last several decades. So, that information is gathered through a multitude of ways. One is public disclosures. Two is some of the geospatial analysis. Three, there's oftentimes direct scouting for these operations in region or in countries, and it's comprised of not just some of the locational and ownership information, but also operational data, because we've been tracking these projects for so long. So production levels, capacity levels, cost, and investment and revenue data. It's just for some of the heavy industries, whether it's energy, mining, automotive manufacturing, chip manufacturing, data centers, just to name a few. These are projects that we've been tracking for decades to provide some of the key kind of market analysis that we're well known for. So using that kind of depth of data really provides a lot of the foundation for not just this data set, but also a lot of our other climate risk solutions. So it's something that we are actively kind of continuing to build out.
Maybe I can add a few things here. Is that so? There is this information, and then we combine that with additional data sets and capabilities that we have to model some of the the nature impacts. So if you think about the mining assets, for instance, we use satellite imagery to actually identify the areas that are being impacted, and so therefore we use the actual polygon of each asset to quantify the area impacted. For buildings, we leverage the Google and Microsoft products to identify again the actual building and the polygons of each building, and then we have a hierarchy of sources that we use. We leverage a lot of the the factors and proxies that we have internally to estimate based on like production capacity, etc. So that we can build an estimate ranging from like true observation from a satellite to a modelization based on capacity, for instance.
And you mentioned a white paper for the methodology specifically around the biodiversity side, but is that something that you could perhaps link to just so that we have it for reference? And does that cover the asset location piece as well? If not, if there's a separate white paper, then we'd be interested in that too.
Yeah, we can definitely paste the link to the nature risk profile methodology, which we released with INEP WCMC in January. Absolutely.
Do you have any further questions, Stephanie? If I may, in this case, I will add one question on location data. I was wondering whether all these data and in all its granularity are actually available to investors using the tool, or there is some kind of a visibility level that is available to investors, but not the whole granularity and not the whole raw data that is behind. How do you put it forward when you propose the solution to your clients?
That's a perfect lead into the demo. So why don't I just bring up the application and we can show it very quickly. So let me know once you can see my screen. All good?
We can see your screen. It is great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I've already kind of taken what I've done is I've gone in and just identified the companies. So here what we're doing is we're looking at BHP, but you have the ability to search for across our full company coverage. And the first thing that you can see once you come into the application is a lot of the 130 plus metrics that I identified earlier. But you've got the ecosystem footprint, the overall dependency score, and then the overall asset count that we use in order to generate the full score and the analysis for whichever company that you're looking at. There's also direct kind of links. You can integrate this with other risk data sets very easily at the corporate level. But Ludmila, to come to your exact question, so here in the map, you can see, for example, what the actual asset name is, the overall ecosystem footprint, the dependency score. And then as you go further down, you can see what the location is, the actual facility type, and then the additional metrics associated with those facilities across the full asset coverage. And so that asset level data is available to our subscribers. And there's the asset level data, and then there's also the corporate level data as well. You have the ability to identify, again, focusing on dependency, what the top kind of dependency risks are, and across those different ecosystem services. So you can then see, for example, here, just to focus on BHP, the highest two dependency risks are fire remediation and climate regulation. And then you can see the kind of cascade from there. So that's on the dependency side. So the metrics, again, at the top here are split, on impact and dependency. So you can also then see on the left-hand side what the impact is, the overall land use, overall ecosystem impact index, and the contributing factors below. So this is what subscribers will see. They can also export this, all of this data into a database and to integrate it into their existing workflows. And then you can look across different types of industries where I can come in. Select Apple, and you see different asset distributions that then now come in, look at that geospatial data. And you can see the overall distribution of Apple's operations across the world, and also the overlay with key biodiversity areas.
Thank you very much. One quick question on my side. Now we're talking about the direct operations, and you probably know that there are also discussions, and I see that Gautier says yes. So he's already ready to comment on my question. Yeah, what are the possibilities to go beyond direct operations? Yeah, please, Gautier, go ahead. You understood me right away.
Yeah, no, that's something that we've had on the roadmap from the start, and that's a question that we get a lot. So for this first version, we focused on terrestrial ecosystems, so essentially land use and direct operations. But we have on the roadmap to expand to additional realms like freshwater, marine ecosystems, as well as expanding this to deforestation. But the metrics, the way they've been designed, are absolutely compatible with supply chain assessment. It's a matter of really expanding the assessment to the supply chain by combining geographic specific information on the supply chain, which is the plan for future announcements. I don't know if you want to add anything on this roadmap.
That was great.
And since you mentioned other realms, I do know that coverage of ocean represents some kind of a problem for many investors and also many data providers. So we are very much concentrated today based on solutions that I see on the market on the terrestrial biodiversity. So how do you plan to cover oceans?
That's a very good question. We are facing the same challenges as everyone, and so we have on our roadmap to tackle those. But at this stage, we're not concretely there yet.
All right, but you're positive on the direction that you're taking, or what would you say?
Yeah, well,
you don't know yet.
We don't know yet, so
Okay.
So we remain positive, but I'm sure we'll find a solution somewhere.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have further questions? Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions here. Yeah. Well, first of all, well, thanks for the presentation and congratulations on the always difficult task of applying existing international frameworks such as the UNEP's nature risk profile through a tool, which is always a challenge and difficult, right? To downscale a quite generalistic framework into an actual practical tool. So that's my congratulations in that sense. Of course, as all tools, there's strengths and points for improvement. In terms of strengths, I see it as something very positive, the fact that you included dependencies, which is always a challenge, the link between impacts and dependencies to the location-specific variables, which is always very, very important. And of course, as you were just saying, like the challenge of including or addressing marine-related impacts due to lack of data, basically. And other aspects such as well, upstream impacts or impacts through the invasive species. So again, overall, I think it's a quite complete tool, and I think it's got a lot of potential. My question now was more related with risks. If I understood well, you are not there yet in the prepare phase of the TNFD LEAP approach, which means that you have not yet transformed the biophysical related impact dependencies units into a risk unit. So my question was, are you planning to actually provide with some sort of risk related result in what unit, if you're planning to do so? And how will be the relationship between the different impacts or types of impacts and dependencies into these, kind of risk related results? So this movement from impacts and dependencies to risks, I would like to understand more how you're planning to do so, or if you have done so, how did you do it? Thanks.
Maybe I can take that one, and Bob, feel free to jump in. So I guess on the impact side, first of all, we wanted to focus on getting the impact metrics right. And then for those impacts to become risks. So we do provide contextual metrics with the overlap with key biodiversity areas and protected areas, and that's kind of like a binary indicator of potential reputational or regulatory risk, right? Those ones are always very tricky to assess because it's very hard to quantify what the reputational impact might be on the brand. It's also very difficult to understand what the fine might be for any given event. So these are more like simple binary flags. The impact metrics themselves, well, it depends whether you're looking at, you take a double materiality or single materiality lens, right? If you're taking a double materiality lens, then the impact metrics suffice themselves because you quantify the impact on nature. If you're taking a single materiality lens, then the next step is to essentially turn these impacts into a transition pathway to then understand how far a company is tracking compared to a scenario or a target. So that's the next step. But the first thing we wanted to do is to get the impact metrics right so that they actually are fit for purpose in a scenario analysis context. And when you look at scenario, if you look at where climate is, all the scenarios are essentially based on greenhouse gas budgets, and it's very likely, at least from the way we see it, it's very likely that at some point we're going to end up with some kind of nature budget, right, that we're going to have to live within. And so what we wanted to do was to design the impact metrics so that they're actually fit for purpose to be used in the context of a nature budget. And that's why it was so important to have different layers of impact metrics, but also have that headline indicator, the ecosystem footprint, that combines the impact on integrity and the significance, so that you can get as close as possible to a ton of CO2 equivalent that you can therefore use later on as your nature budget. So that's on the impact side. So we'll work on that later, but I don't think that the whole industry is there in terms of scenario analysis and nature budget, but that's the ambition even within the TNFD. So we'll follow that very closely. On the dependency side, we had to tackle things incrementally. So we always had the ambition to calculate a financial exposure of businesses to the dependency on ecosystem services. That's what the TNFD wants to promote. Having said that, a lot of the assess and prepare metrics that are recommended, like the share of revenues exposed to highly exposed to ecosystem services, can already be calculated using the data that we provide our clients with, because we break down the revenues of companies across business activities, and we provide, we have the dependency score for each of these activities across a company. So it's very easy to calculate that percentage. And in fact, that's something that we could very well add to the platform offering later on. So that's something that we're already doing. What we're not doing at the moment is the actual quantification in financial terms of the potential risk to the business. That's something that we hope we'll be able to do at some point in the future. But if you think in terms, where climate is, most of the climate risk assessment are made through the quantification of carbon. And unfortunately, there's not yet much quantification, at least agreed quantification on nature. But I originally come from TrueCost, and a lot of the work that we did at TrueCost at the time was what we call environmental valuation of externalities. So very much the application of the natural capital concept. And we could very well work on applying the similar concepts, but in the context of ecosystems. Should we, try and venture into putting a value on ecosystems themselves? But so we've done the first step, but there's definitely a lot more steps ahead until we can get to that dollar number.
Yes, thank you very much, Gautier. Thanks.
So many thanks to all. I see that we already used all of our time available. So thank you very much once again for your time availability, for all the information that you shared with us today. Bob, Gauthier, it was really helpful. Thank you very much. As I said, provided that the webinar was registered, it will be shared once again within the members of the Working Group on Impact Assessment and Finance for Biodiversity Foundation members. So I stop here. I thank everybody once again. Anne-Marie, I don't know if you want to say something, or Anne-Marie?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks a lot all.
Brilliant.
And they're working on the windows here in my room now, so I got a little bit distracted at the end. But we'll put it on the YouTube and share it with all members with a hidden link, so only members can approach the recording. Many thanks all, and yeah, great you've joined and got to know more about this fascinating tool. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day, all.
Well, Gauthier, have a nice day. Bye-bye.